The Chinese central government is sending more than 3,000 medical workers to Wuhan to help treat critical patients with the coronavirus pneumonia. They'll be assigned to around 20 wards and intensive care units. All are expected to arrive today. More than 21,000 medical professionals from other parts of China have already been sent to Hubei. Another batch of army medical workers has arrived in Wuhan. They are among the 2,600 additional military personnel sent by the central government, bringing their total number to 6,600. Well, earlier, our reporter Zhao Yanfei updated us from Wuhan's airport. We are moving on to another story now. A month into the battle against the virus, some hospitals in Wuhan are running dangerously low on supplies. Companies that manufacture masks and protective suits are answering the demand, but getting these things to hospitals is another challenge. CGTN's Zhu Xinchen reports.
A fresh delivery of 2,400 medical masks to Wuhan Children's Hospital by local volunteers. It might seem like a lot, but it'll only last a few days.
We are most in need of masks and protective suits. We are fine with most else.
The scarcity of these medical supplies is also being felt at other hospitals in Wuhan, including the city's number 4 hospital.
Due to a supply shortage, people getting out of the quarantine zone have to register their names, departments, and work IDs to ensure one person gets one mask.
Number 4 hospital posted a new help letter online on Tuesday, detailing the protection gear they need. CGTN has learned that over 20 hospitals in Wuhan have posted similar help letters online, asking for medical supplies this week. The most demanded products: N95 medical masks and medical-graded protection suits. The situation is expected to improve. Data on Tuesday suggests that mask and protective suit makers in 22 Chinese provinces have resumed over 75% of their production. Yet, logistical issues such as finding drivers and factory workers amid the virus outbreak still present hurdles. Xu Xinchen, CGTN, Wuhan, Hubei Province.
Professor Sanjaya Senanayake, a specialist in infectious diseases from Australian National University, explained how infection might possibly spread through sewage pipes.
In the high-rise building, there is a vertical pipe called a sanitary riser. And each bathroom on every floor near the toilet, there is a tube called a U-trap, which connects to that sanitary riser. If that U-trap contains water, there's a barrier between the sewage system and that bathroom. But in Amoy Gardens, a lot of them were dry and didn't have water, so there was a communication. But for the viral particles in the sewage system to rise and spread into everyone's bathroom, you needed one more factor: negative pressure. And that came in the form of the exhaust fans that a lot of people have in their bathrooms. And that led to the perfect storm, so to speak, in Amoy Gardens. All we know at the moment is that genetic parts of it have been found in poo, but we haven't grown live virus in the poo yet. So it may not actually be able to spread that way. But if it can, then the important thing, particularly when using public toilets, is to close the lid when you flush and observe good hand hygiene.
Well, now for an update on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which is anchored at the Yokohama port near to Tokyo. More passengers have tested positive for the coronavirus. Earlier, we talked to CGTN's correspondent Terry Terashima.
Japanese Health and Welfare Minister Katsunobu Kato held a press conference this morning, and he said that they've tested additional 221 people with the test, and they found 43 passengers and 1 crew member found to be positive. That brings the total of number of people tested positive from the Diamond Princess to 218. And also on Wednesday, they said that one of the quarantine officer contracted the virus. So that brings questions of whether the quarantine situation in the ship is properly done, or is adequate. Now, the quarantine officer did not have a full protective gear, and he had contacts with the passengers. So that brings, when asked, the Health and Welfare Ministry said that they will impose a stricter rule. And they also said that they're going to prioritize the elderly and people with chronic illnesses with the test, so they can be disembarked and be treated with their chronic symptoms in medical facilities, or in the cases whether they're found positive, they will be quarantined in hospitals nearby. But there have been a lot of criticism about the conditions in the ship, and it is worsening. And the government still have not answered about testing all the passengers by the end of the quarantine period that ends on 19th of February. So that is something that we need to outwatch for, continue to outwatch for.
Another cruise ship carrying 2,200 passengers and crew has anchored off Cambodia over fears that people on board may be carrying the coronavirus. The Wester Dam is anchored a kilometre from the main Sihanoukville port. It had spent nearly 2 weeks at sea after being turned away by several Asian countries. A team of health officials is expected to conduct health checks on board and determine the disembarking process. Well, earlier we talked to Rudy Eggers, the World Health Organization's Kenya representative. He touched on the preventative methods African countries can take in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak.
So, thank you. You are quite correct that currently there's no confirmed case in Africa, but we've of course had several suspected cases. So people that have come back from China, almost all have got some connection to travel to China. And in several African countries, including Kenya, we've had suspected cases. Here in Kenya, we've now had 9 suspected cases that were initially investigated. Some of them were rapidly discarded, but there were 6 or so where we went through the confirmation testing. So what the countries have to do is they have to prepare for the potential importation of cases. So the first step is, of course, making sure that there's screening procedures at the airport. So when people are arriving from flights, from overseas flights, mainly from China, but also really from other international hubs, that these people get screened for the symptoms of coronavirus. So they get screened for fever, and if they're symptomatic of coughing and sneezing and that kind of thing. But there are other things that the country also has to do. They have to keep the public informed. So there's a whole public awareness campaign that has to be done. Firstly, that the public doesn't panic, that they don't get the feeling that immediately there will be a huge outbreak. But then also awareness of symptoms, awareness of people that have traveled to China, and if they have any indication that they are ill, that they present themselves to a health worker. And then also basic hygiene messages, washing of hands, coughing and sneezing into the elbow, preparing food, etc. These reagents have been distributing to countries. WHO and other partners have been working on this. There are different protocols that are being used. So currently there are approximately 200 tests available now in Kenya. You would probably need about 3 tests per person, so maybe 60 or so people can be tested in Kenya. But WHO is resupplying, so there are additional tests that are coming in. What is very important initially is that even the negative tests get verified. So from the first couple of people that are tested, even the tests that are done in country get verified by a reference laboratory, either South Africa or in Europe or even in China. From what it sounds and from what WHO is saying and our Director General is saying, it sounds as if China reacted very speedily and very transparently to this outbreak, and that has been very much welcomed by the international community and by WHO. So this is not a time for discrimination, it's really a time for solidarity. So there's no sense and no benefit really in discriminating to people that look Chinese or that are Chinese, that are outside in the world, because the risk is zero, really zero for these people. So there's absolutely no sense in discrimination at all.
Well, we are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including United Nations asks foreign powers to end violation of the Libya arms embargo. And rebel attacks worsen the humanitarian situation in the DRC.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The United Nations Security Council has voted to adopt a resolution calling for a lasting ceasefire in Libya. The resolution is based on a peace plan drawn up by prominent world leaders at a conference in Berlin. In January, members of the Security Council also reiterated calls for foreign powers to end violation of Libya's arms embargo. CGTN's Sarah Walton reports now from New York.
The resolution passed by the Security Council on Wednesday is aimed at implementing a 55-point plan of action for Libya that was reached during a meeting of world leaders in Berlin last month. It includes calls for a permanent ceasefire, the dismantling of militias, and the resumption of the country's political process. It also demands that foreign powers respect an arms embargo, which the UN says has been repeatedly violated. Now, the resolution was approved with 14 yes votes. However, Russia abstained, saying it doesn't believe all parties in Libya are ready for this peace process. The representative for the United Kingdom, which drafted the resolution, says it simply reinforces the Berlin Conference plan that was backed by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
All the Security Council resolution does is try and put into concrete form so the international community and the UN can take action to uphold the arms embargo, to assist the parties in coming to a ceasefire, and to monitor that ceasefire once agreed, and to make preparations to look at options for monitoring it before it's agreed.
Now, the situation in Libya has become increasingly chaotic since Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. Currently, the country's interim Government of National Accord, the GNA, based in the capital Tripoli, is coming under attack from the opposing Libyan National Army, the LNA. And fighting has increased in recent weeks, with reports of artillery shells hitting the centre of Tripoli on Tuesday.
We remain concerned about reports that forces affiliated with both the Libyan National Army and the Government of the National Accord are contemplating significant military action in the near future. Whether offensive or preemptive in nature, such actions would violate the understandings reached in Berlin.
Representatives of the LNA and GNA did meet to discuss terms for a ceasefire in Geneva last week. This Security Council resolution welcomes those talks and calls for their continuation. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Meanwhile, the United Nations says forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar have blocked flights carrying its staff to and from Libya. This has hampered humanitarian and mediation efforts by the United Nations. Well, according to the UN mission in Libya, Haftar's eastern-based Libya National Army has on several occasions refused to allow the regular UN flights to land. Since last April, Haftar's forces have been trying to capture the capital Tripoli from the internationally recognized government. UN envoy Ghassan Salameh has been mediating between the LNA and the Tripoli government, but relations have been difficult as the Libyan mission has condemned the airstrikes blamed on the LNA. Eastern officials have accused Salameh of being biased against them, but the United Nations has denied these accusations. Well, CGTN's Yasser Hakim is following the developments from Cairo. Yasser, what are Haftar's reasons for barring these UN flights, and has he responded to the UN Security Council accusations?
Yes, Karen, we received a statement from Khalifa Haftar, or the Libyan National Army, in response to the UN resolution or UN accusations. And the statement began with denouncing the UN report and saying that the UN delegation's statement concerning this issue has been based on inaccurate information, on what they say is it does not reflect the true events on the ground, and does not give the public opinion or the UN decision makers the right information concerning what is happening in Libya. The Libyan National Army says that it's only one airport in Tripoli, which is Ma'atiqa, which is where there has been a blockade, air blockade from the Libyan National Army. Now, why is that? That's because in the last few months, since the LNA has put a blockade on some areas in Libya because of the fighting, it has refrained from putting a blockade on Ma'atiqa airport, the only airport in Tripoli. And it was open for UN peace efforts and also for humanitarian aid throughout the last few months. However, what the LNA says that the airport has been used by Turkey and the Fayez Sarraj government to transport weapons from Turkey and what he calls militants and mercenaries. And that's why the LNA had to put a blockade on the Ma'atiqa airport and refusing some of the flights from the UN. On the other hand, the LNA has said that it has sent to the UN before, saying that there are 35 other airports that are controlled by the LNA that allow the UN to use any time during the year to send humanitarian aid or personnel. So it's only one airport that there is a problem with, and therefore there was no need for accusations from the UN, because the UN has the access to 35 other airports to use in Libya to send humanitarian aid or to send personnel for peaceful efforts. So that's the response from the LNA and Khalifa Haftar to the UN accusations.
And Yasser, what is the latest situation on the ground in Libya? And also, as you were saying, one airport is still operating with this blockade, with these UN planes. What are the effects of this blockade?
Yes, obviously, humanitarian aid is important, that it would reach most of the countries, most of the areas of the country, and especially Tripoli, where now the fighting is ongoing. Ma'atiqa airport, where the blockade has happened, is the only operational airport in Tripoli, and therefore that's why the UN was working on concentrating on this part. But the humanitarian aid is essential, and that's why what will happen is that the UN humanitarian aid or personnel would be arriving through other airports and then taking other routes into Tripoli, whether through cars or any other form of transportation into Tripoli to send the humanitarian aids. But it is important that humanitarian aid continues at the moment as fighting continues between both powers inside Libya, and at the same time to allow the UN to have more efforts to achieve peace and negotiations between both sides.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was Yasser Hakim there on the latest developments in Libya. Well, to Egypt now. In just the past week, ISIL has claimed responsibility for 2 major attacks in the country's North Sinai. The first was an attack on a natural gas pipeline connecting Egypt to Israel. The second was a weekend attack against a military checkpoint. The Egyptian army has been fighting an insurgency in North Sinai since 2013. Here's CGTN's Adel El-Mahrouhi with that report.
Following a long period of relative calm, 2 attacks interrupt North Sinai. During the weekend, militants approached an Egyptian armed forces checkpoint. In a statement, the military spokesman said troops managed to foil the attack.
There are only dispersed and few small groups of terrorists in the Sinai. These groups have been trying to re-emerge by all means through doing some terrorist attacks, which can be described as random attacks.
The Egyptian armed forces said they've killed 10 terrorists, while the announced total injuries and deaths from the military side were 7 officers. Few days earlier, ISIL's arm in Egypt, the Sinai province, claimed responsibility of blowing up a natural gas pipeline with Israel.
It's an attack that one person or a very small group can implement. It doesn't appear to be well organized, and therefore it doesn't indicate that the terrorist group is well established in the Sinai. It clearly shows that the remnants are attacking easy targets, while it fails to directly face the police and the army.
Late in January, ISIL's new leader urged his followers to attack Egyptian security forces. He has also added Israel's interests in the region to their targets list. It's the strongest emergence of ISIL activities in the Sinai in nearly a year. Through that time, the group didn't appear to be capable of implementing direct attacks against military checkpoints. Some analysts here are warning that more attacks could follow. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights has urged the Tunisian government to suspend talks with Spain, which it says does not respect the rights of migrants. The forum has criticised the inhumane conditions of detention that many Tunisian migrants are subjected to on Spanish territory. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi has more from Tunis.
The forum revealed that over 800 undocumented Tunisian migrants, including women and children, have been held for more than 5 months in poor conditions at the detention center for immigrants in Melilla, Spain.
Tunisians who migrated to Spain by land from Morocco are housed in cluttered and dirty plastic tents, exposed to cold and lack of food. This is unacceptable for human beings.
Activists staged a sit-in near the Spanish embassy in Tunis. They urged Madrid to intervene to stop the suffering of Tunisian undocumented migrants.
Tunisian migrants are prisoners who are being treated unlike other nationalities. Spain is making a political statement to impose its migration policies onto Tunisia. This is a breach of the right to personal freedom and safety.
Protesters also urged the Tunisian government to respect its anti-deportation stance announced by the Social Affairs Minister in December 2018.
My husband was first allowed by Spanish authorities to leave Melilla. Then he was arrested while other African migrants were released. So Spanish authorities are legally and ethically accountable for all desperate solutions migrants resort to.
The forum denounced the overuse of detention against undocumented Tunisian migrants as a deterrent and punishment, while failing to consider the need to take non-custodial measures. Activists assert that border management measures must comply with human rights commitments and must not rest on inhuman policies designed to detect, detain and deport undocumented immigrants from Spain and other Mediterranean countries. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Thursday marks World Radio Day. In Ghana, many continue to rely on radio as their main source of information and entertainment. Despite the popularity of social media platforms, radio still reaches the widest audience. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai has more.
Asia Mankwa tunes into the radio every day. It allows her to stay in touch with current affairs and keeps her entertained as she sells her food.
I enjoy listening to radio. It keeps me informed about things happening in the country.
Esi is one of many Ghanaians that will rely on the radio for credible news and information when the country goes to the polls in December. For that reason, the United Nations marks World Radio Day every year to raise awareness among the public of the importance of the medium. Evans Mensah has practiced radio journalism for 15 years. He says the information distributed on air is crucial for maintaining peace in the country. That's even more true during general elections.
Our ability to protect the gate from comments and, I guess, contributions and other, I guess, broadcast items that could inflame passions even further is one of the key things that we guard against. And so this particular year, like other years, what we've done is to develop very strict protocols to guide who gets onto radio.
Although information circulates quickly through social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, radio broadcasters say their work is still relevant. Ghana has more than 390 radio stations. Radio remains important here because it reaches the widest audience with information and entertainment and is accessible to those in remote areas that don't have internet or a television. Communication analysts are concerned about the surge of fake news on social media. Ahead of Ghana's elections, they say even radio isn't immune to the problem.
It has become even more burdensome or crucial for radio stations, especially because of the power that they wield to verify information before going out there on air to put it out.
For many Ghanaians like Esi Amankwa, radio helps shape their lives and guides their opinions on issues affecting the country. They want to trust that the information they get from radio is always accurate and reliable. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
We've got all the business news coming up for you after the break, including the annual Mobile World Congress exhibition in Barcelona, Spain, cancelled over the coronavirus. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to make his State of the Nation address this Thursday.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Mobile World Congress, an annual telecoms industry gathering that draws more than 100,000 visitors to Barcelona, has been cancelled. Organisers made the announcement on Wednesday after a mass exodus by exhibitors due to fears over the coronavirus outbreak. Assurances from local and national health officials that the event would have been safe did little to win the confidence of the exhibitors. The event had been scheduled for February the 24th to the 27th. The announcement followed a crisis meeting of the GSMA board after its hand was forced by the pullout of anchor European members, including Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, BT and Nokia. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is facing mounting pressure to deal with the country's electricity crisis, high levels of unemployment and a staggering economy. Ramaphosa will deliver the State of the Nation address, or SONA, to a joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces later this Thursday. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
The State of the Nation address sets out key policy objectives and deliverables for the year ahead. The address highlights achievements, flags challenges, and outlines interventions to unlock development for the coming financial year. The State of the Nation address also marks the official start of the parliamentary program. President Cyril Ramaphosa came into power in 2008. He's now facing mounting pressure from opposition parties and society at large to decisively deal with corruption and state-owned entities, and also deal with a failing economy and growing unemployment. The president will also be addressing the nation a few weeks after troubled power utility Eskom considered that it would have to implement load shedding for at least the next 18 months. Parliament is likely going to be marred by chaos as opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, have vowed to disrupt the sitting if President Ramaphosa does not fire Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan by the time the president takes to the podium. The party blames Gordhan for the failure of state-owned entities, especially Eskom, but Parliament has vowed to shut this down immediately. The president is also expected to focus on the implementation of socio-economic transformation and redress of structural inequalities. Yoli Njamela for CGTN in Cape Town, South Africa.
Fuel shortages have left motorists in Sudan skipping work to queue for petrol. The crisis has forced the country's transitional government to introduce a rationing system as it tries to manage acute economic pressures. CGTN's Alexandria Majala reports.
Some people in Sudan have been spending entire days in queues that stretch for several kilometers since the fuel crisis began late last week. Coming on top of bread shortages, it has piled more pressure on a government struggling to deliver improvements after former President Omar al-Bashir was ousted last April.
Petrol, oil, bread and gas are all essential and must be made available to the people. I've been here in the petrol queue since 9 a.m. and I'm not even close to the gas station, and now it's 4:30 p.m. and there is a possibility I'll be here until 5 or 5:30. So from 9 a.m. to 5 or 5:30 p.m. to fill up, and there is a possibility they tell me that they've run out.
I go from the bread queue to the petrol queue, and from the petrol queue to the gas queue. Our lives are spent going from one queue to the other.
The government is working under a 3-year power-sharing deal between the military and civilians. It is also battling with the legacy of decades of economic sanctions and mismanagement that hampered infrastructure development and investment. The transitional body has inherited a generous subsidy system under which petrol costs just about 12 US cents at official rates or 6 cents at black market rates per litre.
We have decided that distribution of petrol to privately owned vehicles will be at a value of 120 Sudanese pounds each time. We have also decided to divide the days in which cars fill up their tanks to specific days for owners of license plates with odd numbers and specific days for owners of cars with even numbers.
They say the current fuel shortage is caused by a broken refinery pipeline that they are working to fix, although it's unclear how long this will take. Though there have been occasional fuel shortages before and after last year's uprising, some motorists say the current one is the worst yet. Taxis are hard to find and drivers have sharply raised their prices to compensate for the time they spend queuing for fuel. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
After last month's breakthrough on the Nile dispute, Egyptian, Ethiopian and Sudanese delegations are in Washington once again. This time they're expected to sign a new and comprehensive deal. As Adel El Mahrouki reports, Cairo is hoping to put an end to the 5-year-long dispute.
As soon as the Egyptian foreign and water ministers arrived at Washington, they've held a debrief meeting with their negotiating team, including representatives of the Government Intelligence Bureau and Egyptian law experts. They've been spending the past 2 weeks in D.C. discussing all possible details.
Egypt's huge preparations reflect the dangers Cairo sees the dam could pose on its water security. All state institutions and top security organizations are now involved. They are concerned to draw a complete version of the legal, economic and security effects. Egypt wants to be prepared to face all possible scenarios, from the dam to the talks.
The 3 countries are yet to agree on how to jointly manage the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam during regular hydraulic conditions. They also need to agree on assessing the environmental and geological impact of the dam on the Nile. Egypt is pushing to agree on a mechanism of handling future disputes between the 3 countries.
The implementation of the agreements is extremely important. It's why Egypt will insist on creating a platform to supervise and schedule the implementation on the agreement. Cairo also don't want to wait for a new point of difference to emerge. It's asking to agree on a mechanism of resolving disputes, so when violations happen, no time will be wasted to deal with them.
Egypt fears the dam will affect its Nile water share. It has been comforted by an initial agreement on the filling of the dam reservoir and managing the dam during drought periods. Ethiopia, however, is still expected to sign on that essential outcome from the last round of talks. A comprehensive agreement that leaves no hanging issues. That is what Egypt aims to achieve in Washington, D.C. And after repetitive delays in reaching a final deal, Cairo is hoping that this round of talks would be the last. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
BP plans to change profoundly in order to dramatically cut its carbon emissions by 2050. That's according to its CEO, Bernard Looney. The cuts represent one of the oil sector's most ambitious targets. It also forms part of the biggest overhaul in the company's 111-year history. While investor groups welcome the 2050 targets set out by Looney, environmental campaigners criticised the lack of detail. BP did not say how it intended to get emissions from its operations and barrels produced to net zero, as well as halve the intensity of emissions by all products it sells. The plan, though, puts BP ahead of rivals Royal Dutch Shell, Total, Equinor, and all of the US oil majors.
The world does have a carbon budget. It is finite, and it is running out fast, and we need a rapid transition to net zero. Society has got to deliver on the Paris goals. Our ambition is to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world get to net zero. Aim number one is to be net zero across our entire operations on an absolute basis by 2050 or sooner. Aim number two is to be net zero on an absolute basis across the carbon content of our upstream oil and gas production by 2050 or sooner. Very important. Aim number three is to cut the carbon intensity of the products we sell by 50% by 2050 or sooner. Aim number four is to install methane measurement at all our existing major oil and gas processing sites by 2023, publish the data, and then drive a 50% reduction in the methane intensity of our operations. And we will work to influence our joint ventures to set their own methane intensity targets of 0.2%. Aim number five is to increase the proportion of investment we make into our non-oil and gas businesses. Over time, as investment goes up in low and no carbon, we see it going down in oil and gas.
We're going to a short break. Don't go away, lots more to come, including human rights in South Africa. Exhibition celebrates legendary artist David Koloane.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
To South Africa now, where the Wits University Art Exhibition is celebrating the legendary David Koloane's legacy following his death in 2019. An artist and social activist, Koloane's art provided insight into the daily experiences and struggles of Johannesburg black community. CGTN's Yolisa Njumela has more.
David Koloane was a mentor for many of South Africa's contemporary artists. The legendary artist worked to create spaces such as the Bag Factory Artist Studios and Tupelo workshops for young black artists to flourish.
He would always make time for artists who just walked in off the street carrying their portfolio bags, and you know, these are kind of artists that have no formal training, don't know anything about making conceptual work or anything like that, but just have a technical ability. And he always made time to speak to them and to guide them in some kind of way and encourage them to think about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to engage with art.
In his drawings, paintings and collages, Koloane explored questions about political injustice and human rights. He's considered to have been an influential artist and writer during the apartheid years here in South Africa. Koloane's work has been widely exhibited locally and internationally, so the Wits Arts Museum is just the latest in hosting this much celebrated artist's work.
The exhibition, which is the retrospective exhibition of David Koloane's work, for me is very personal, having known him. As I said in the discussion earlier, there is a real sense of love in it, which I feel because I had been in that space. But there's also a joy and a sadness in having seen some of those works being created in his studio. His impact has been tremendous, from not just being an artist or writer or curator, but someone who founded an institution that paved the way for so many artists and curators and writers and just art administrators.
Koloane encouraged the consumer of his work to acknowledge the lived black experience through cityscapes and everyday scenes in the township and the city. Koloane is a revered artist, a great influence especially to black artists. In 1977, the artist opened the first ever art space in Johannesburg, dedicated specifically to black artists.
His significance is great because this man with a longer collective created spaces for me as a black female that wouldn't have existed, 30 years ago. And that's one of his life works, where he really worked hard to create spaces like the Bag Factory, Tupelo workshop. There's also Fuba.
Koloane passed away at the age of 81 in 2019. Yolisa Njumela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All of the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Morocco winger Hakim Ziyech is on the verge of securing a summer move to Chelsea from Ajax.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We kick off with transfer news, where talented Morocco winger Hakim Ziyech is on the verge of securing a summer move to English Premier League side Chelsea. According to British media, the Blues have agreed a deal in principle with Ajax Amsterdam to sign the 26-year-old for $49.3 million. Ziyech, who helped Ajax win the league and Dutch Cup double last season, has seen his